It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com, as well as the mobile app. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. We appreciate everybody tuning in. Multiple ways to interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, of course, at 201-939-4513. You can also follow and interact with the two of us on Twitter. He's at Matt Citak, one word. I'm at Lance Medow, one word as well. Last name Medow. And we appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us from the Giants Podcast Studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. So, a busy show, Matt, for the two of us. We want to cover a wealth of material as we gear up, obviously, for OTAs that are going to start next week. And this is going to be our last show before Memorial Day weekend. So Matt and I are going to go through what to look forward to as OTAs get underway next week. So we'll tackle that. But I want to start with some news and notes around the league, because around this time of the year, the NFL, the owners get together and they have an opportunity with the competition committee, of course, to pass through a number of rules. And I know you and Paul covered a little bit of this in recent days. I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents, given that we got the official word yesterday that the tush push is going to stay. It will be alive and well, at least continuing into next season. They did not get 24 of the 32 votes. That's what's needed for a proposal to be ratified. They fell too shy of that, which I guess goes to show you, Matt, that, you know, it's still a little divisive across the league, right? There are a number of teams that want to keep it, headed by the Eagles, of course. And then there's a bunch of other teams that say, hey, maybe we should rethink this. But I'm not surprised at all by the result. And I side with, I thought Dan Campbell, the Lions head coach, and Mike Vrabel, who now has returned to be the Patriots head coach, said it best. And they're both of the mindset that the league overall, this is not just a tush push. I don't like it when rules are implemented simply because one team or two teams do it effectively and the rest of the league can't stop it. That, to me, it's not an answer to simply, all right, we're going to remove the play. Well, that should then challenge the rest of the NFL to say, well, what are other strategies that we can implement to counter that, as opposed to let's just all of a sudden make it evaporate from the face of the earth.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I've said, similar sentiments the last couple of days with Paul on this matter. Paul seemed to think that every team's response would just to be send the missile linebacker flying over the line of scrimmage like the Commanders did in the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, look, everyone, BBK listeners, they've heard me speak a lot on this topic the last 2 days. The one thing which I wish I had realized on yesterday's show, but I did not, is Paul, was talking a lot about how the Eagles and Bills, run this play the most by far. Well, I thought it was interesting. I've found out last night, Bills actually voted to ban the tush push. They were not one of the 10 teams that voted to keep it. The Eagles obviously were leading the charge to keep it, but Buffalo wants the play gone. So I just thought a little interesting tidbit, since Paul kept on bringing up how it was only 2 teams that kept on running the play over and over and over again.
Well, and the other part of this conversation centered around safety. Now, the problem I have with that argument, Matt, is that, first of all, the sample size is essentially minute at this stage, right? Because the tush push has not been around for X amount of years.
3-ish years, maybe
in that
parts
ballpark.
of 4. No more than 4, though, yeah.
So how are you then to determine, or anyone to run wild with that data over 3 to 4 years and say that it's an unsafe play? I don't think that information doesn't exist as it stands right now to justify we have to remove the play for the well-being of NFL players. And I think NFL players would be the first ones that would say, there's got to be more data to analyze before we run wild with these narratives. And that was my issue with those that were coming from the perspective of it's not a safe play, because to your point, you got defensive guys coming at it like a missile and you have offensive linemen going low for the leg area. And I get all of that, but show me the high volume of injuries that were recorded in the last 3 to 4 years as a result of that specific play. If that doesn't exist, then to me that's a very weak argument.
Yeah, so that was my biggest, point that I guess kind of frustrated me with Paul more so on
Getting
Tuesday.
frustrated talking to Paul? Welcome to the club.
Yeah, Matt got no support.
Yeah, all the callers were agreeing with Paul too, and it baffled me because my main thing, and I started off the conversation Tuesday, my stance at least, by saying I'm not going to sit up here and say the tush push should be banned. I'm not going to sit up here and say it needs to stay. I'm a little indifferent. I kind of leave it. I left it more up towards the decision makers.
Sure,
it doesn't make a difference to me truly one way or the other. But I had a strong problem, and I made it known to Paul that you can't go ahead shouting from the mountaintop that it is a player health and safety issue when you have zero evidence to support it.
Yeah, you need facts.
Troy Vincent came out after the season and literally said that there were 0 injuries on. It was only like 105 tush pushes run this past season, but there were no injuries on any of those plays. That the medical professionals that studied each and every one of those plays, they did not find a single injury on those plays. So that was my biggest argument, because obviously player health and safety should be number one priority when it comes to just about any issue when it comes to football. I think we can agree on that.
Sure.
And to me, it's sort of like there were some people shouting player health and safety. This is a safety issue. And to me, it's you kind of get into a situation where it's like the boy that cried wolf. If you just, for every single possible issue or rule change, people just start shouting, this is a health and safety issue. You do that enough times, people are going to start tuning out when people use that as a reasoning. And then there's going to be an issue that actually is a player health and safety issue, and people aren't going to support it as much because they're going to be like, we've heard this before. Like, this is the same argument you say every year about every single rule proposal or whatsoever. So I had a big issue with that. I agree with you on that. I was saying, if you want to ban the tush push because you think it's bad for the sport, it goes against the integrity of the game, I can understand that more. But don't call it a health and safety issue when there's just zero evidence to support that.
Yeah, and maybe in 5 years, there will be the data. But then let's have the conversation. Let's table it for now, and then 5 years, collect more information, and then we'll see. But to run wild with that now is just absolutely ridiculous. You were alluding to the Buffalo Bills being one of the teams that runs the play yet wanted the tush push eliminated. Just for our audience to understand, these were the 10 teams, Matt, that voted against a proposed ban on the tush push, meaning they were okay with leaving it as is. The Eagles, of course, the Ravens, the Browns, the Lions, the Jaguars, the Dolphins, the Patriots, the Saints, the Jets, and the Titans. Now, the reason why I wanted to go through that 10, I don't know if you looked at those closely. When you go over that, to me, what jumps out immediately is a lot of AFC teams, right? We're fine with keeping it. But every team that's in the NFC that has to deal with the Eagles more often, right? All of these teams, they don't have to see the Eagles until probably the Super Bowl, though every 4 years or so they'll play the Eagles. So it's, once again, it's an art of convenience, I would argue, when you look at the voting. And that's another reason why I'm happy it's going to stay put, because it just goes to show you teams are going to vote based on, does it impact me? Or does it actually hurt the well-being of the league? And I think based on how the vote played out, it was more of NFC teams looking out for themselves than looking out for, is the information supporting the cause here to actually make sure that we don't have the tush push here moving forward?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. Also, it does not surprise me that one of the only NFC teams was the Detroit Lions with Dan Campbell. Like, obviously, any sort of physicality to the sport, he's on board with that.
And a great offensive line they have, too.
Of course.
Yeah.
But just one other thing that I thought was kind of funny was months ago when I guess the conversation got brought up again about a potential ban of the tush push, Nick Sirianni said, I better have the support of Shane Steichen, Kellen Moore, and who's the third former Eagles coordinator? Jonathan Gannon.
Jonathan Gannon from
He's
Arizona.
like, those three coaches all have head coaching jobs because of the tush push, so I better have the support of all three of them. Well, only Kellen Moore voted in support.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. Arizona's on that list.
The other
as well
two
as
teams,
the Colts,
despite the tush push helping them get their jobs, voted against it. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Well, you know what's interesting, and I'm going to have to look more into this. I wonder if Steichen and, let's say, Gannon, to your point, they were totally fine with it. Is it in their hands, or does ownership surpass their feelings and emotions. See, that's the
point.
other thing that I'd be curious, because Sirianni's got an excellent point. You know, those guys, right, they were elevated as a result of the success of the Eagles and centering around that play, but Steichen and Gannon, they could have very well campaigned, right, within their own organizations, and at the end of the day, the owner said, no, we want to get rid of the tush-push.
That is true. The owners
I'd
end up
be curious.
They get final decisions. So
Correct.
That's a good point.
That's something that I think you got to take into consideration, or I should say Sirianni should take that into consideration before he runs wild. But it's all in fun in terms of him publicly going after his former assistants anyway. On a somewhat related note, the other thing that I wanted to bring up with respect to rules, and this was thankfully removed from even going to a vote, is the Lions were campaigning for the playoff seeding to change, right? As you saw with respect to wild card teams who have better records than division winners getting A, higher seeds, and B, being able to host early playoff games. I'm thrilled, Matt, I don't know about you, that they did not even put this up to vote, because this was my biggest issue, and I've talked about this in previous years. If you remember, we had the NFC East a few seasons back where you had everybody sub 500. Washington ultimately won the division. Carolina won the division one year, 7-8-1. And the reason why I didn't get all worked up over that is, A, it's very rare that occurs. Number two, the minute you start elevating wild card teams over division winners and saying, we just look at everybody top to bottom, you're removing the incentive of winning the division. And the structure of the schedule is around divisional play, right? You play everybody in your division twice, and then your schedule, with the exception of now 3 additional games because of the 17th game that you play against the other conference, is all equally built around everybody within the division. If you start now all of a sudden de-incentivizing winning the division, then that defeats the whole purpose of how the NFL is currently structured. So I'm not for anything that eats away at rewarding teams for winning the division.
Well, it doesn't completely take it away, because the tiebreaker, if there are two teams that in this proposed seeding that obviously did not even go up to the vote,
sure,
the tiebreaker between two teams that have the same record would be, if one of them is the division winner, then that's the tiebreaker. Then they get the higher seed. So it's not completely de-incentivizing. I get what you're saying. And it is a good point. You know, we have 6 games on the schedule as against your division. The main reason being because the division winner obviously clinches one of the spots in the playoffs, a home game in the playoffs. I get that.
Which is valuable. I mean, that's huge.
For sure. But on the flip side, though, you get situations like last year where you go into the last game of the season and the two teams with the best records in football are playing against each other for the division title, the 1 seed, and then the loser, who would have the second best record in the conference, drops all the way down to the 5th seed. With situations like that make me think, you know, maybe this is not the worst idea. I don't know. Last year I feel like it was the most prominent example of that.
And that was an outlier.
The Lions and Vikings. Yeah. Obviously that does not happen every year.
Well, Matt, you had a 15-win team and a 14-win team in the same division. Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I would say you'd probably have to go back a decade minimum since we actually saw the level of competition that way. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but what I wanted to jump in and say based on what you were talking about is, so if we use last year as an example, and to your point, the Vikings dropped down as a result of losing to the Lions, so they're a wild card team. But if we just look at records, so Minnesota was better than the 10-7 Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the 10-7 LA Rams. So if we adopted the Lions school of thought, the Vikings would be the 3rd seed, right? It would have been Detroit, Philadelphia, Minnesota. So what I'm saying is Tampa Bay and the Rams won their divisions. I don't want Tampa Bay and the Rams to move down. They should be rewarded as one of the top 4 seeds for winning the division because of, once again, the structure of the league. And yes, it stinks for the Vikings. Don't get me wrong, but that's the sacrifice you make. Some years you're going to be in a division that's cutthroat, which the Giants have experienced and other teams are going to experience it if they haven't, and that's the price you pay. I would say the same thing. I don't like in the NBA that they even tweaked. There's flexibility in the NBA. If you're second, you move up. I don't like that. You win the division, that should give you an advantage.
All right, so maybe, I hear what you're saying. It's very valid points. So maybe when this issue is revisited next year, because it's certainly not going to just get swept under the rug and disappear
without
forever.
a doubt. Yep.
maybe down the road, if this ever does get adopted, maybe they also, implement a new schedule format. Maybe instead of guaranteed, 2 games against each division opponent, they only make it 1 guaranteed game. I don't know. You'd have to get creative. I do hear what you're saying, though, and I don't think I agree with you that it doesn't make total sense to have 6 division games, that be a prominent part of your schedule, but then not that much incentive to actually win your division. So I don't know. Maybe they come up with some new scheduling format that makes more sense with the playoff reseeding.
And your last item, if that happens, then I could start to come around. See, the schedule formula has to change for me to be open to all of a sudden taking away an advantage from a division winner. Now, speaking of the division, that brings us to another announcement yesterday, right at the tail end of yesterday's show. HBO Max, whatever they're calling themselves in this day and age. I know they went back,
Max.
which I'm happy. I'm original guy, so I like the fact that it went back to the original name. But anyway, getting back to the point at hand, Buffalo Bills will be the training camp version of Hard Knocks, and then the NFC East is going to be showcased on the in-season version. Now, last year we saw them decide that they're going to focus on divisions, and they did it with the AFC North. We've seen the Arizona Cardinals and the Colts be the focus of the in-season Hard Knocks. So they came around, and I think they probably realized if some teams mathematically that late in the season are not going to be in it, it doesn't always make for great television. So I like the idea of if you cover 4 teams, you're going to guarantee at least 2 of them are going to be in the thick of things. And I thought the way they presented the North, and I'm a huge fan of Hard Knocks. I don't care who's on the show. I love the fact that they peel the curtain back and take you behind the scenes. So I have no problem. I mean, there's more of an incentive that the Giants in the NFC East are going to be showcased, but if anybody, other division-wise, was on it, I'd have no problem. And, for people to throw out, oh, man, late in the season, now the team has to worry about the cameras. The reason why I fight back, Matt, against that argument is, and I've talked to the producers of Hard Knocks on many programs in the past, they're of the belief, and I think there's validity behind this, all of the teams in this day and age have been exposed to what Hard Knocks is about. They know what the producers need, the cameras, and even individual teams like the Giants, right? Giants Life. They're exposed to that even when they're not on Hard Knocks, that this idea that they've got to adjust and all of a sudden make these changes and it could be a distraction. I think that's a very weak argument, and I don't think it's as problematic as maybe some people make it out to be.
Yeah, and look, I get how since this announcement, there have been many comments by Giants fans, jokes by other people that are not, fans of the Giants organization, making light of the Hard Knocks show last year. I get that. Obviously, the way that Hard Knocks played out last year did not, end up the best for the Giants. But
well, that was also the offseason, though, in fairness.
But this is going to be a completely different show. That was the first and potentially only time we're going to see Hard Knocks follow a team in the offseason as they make all of these very key roster decisions, who to sign, who to let go, who to draft. That obviously had never been done before, and based on how last year went, may not happen again. But in-season Hard Knocks, we've seen a couple years now. We've seen the training camp Hard Knocks for a while. We know what those shows are about. It's more about the football, like the X's and O's.
The players,
the coaching staff, not the front office, not ownership. So I feel like I understand some concerns just hearing Giants are on Hard Knocks again, but it's going to be a completely different show. Like, I don't think it's going to be a situation where, the Giants are going to come off not in the greatest light as some people say they did last year. Like, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're just going to get to see more behind the scenes content of, the coaching staff interacting with the players, which on a yearly basis, when we get Hard Knocks, everyone loves it. Everyone loves seeing these cameras follow the players, the coaches around. I know in today's day and age, you do get to see behind the scenes definitely more often than you used to, back in the day. But we all love getting more Giants content. I mean, Giants Life, the first 2 episodes of Giants Life that came out a couple weeks ago were huge hits. Everyone loved it. It's kind of going to be more like that, I feel like. But obviously in season and more, X's and O's centered.
Yeah, if you've watched the structure of the show, to your point, you're going to see Brian Dable and the rest of the team's coaches address their teams during the week. You're going to see how they prepare for an upcoming opponent. They'll do some feature-esque stories on individual players and their family interactions and so forth. It's not going to be, honestly, if you look back at last year off the top of my head, I don't even know if any of the GMs were showcased on the program because it was so centered on players, scheduling, coaches, talking to them individually, position meeting rooms. I would be stunned if the GMs in the front office, because they don't have time. In a given episode, you got to recap. Think about it. Some weeks when they're not playing divisional games, that's 4 games, Matt, that they have to account for. The producers will tell you there's not enough time in a 60-minute program to get into the nuts and bolts of front office transactions. So it's going to be completely different subject matter and so forth. One other item I wanted to get before we open up the lines, and then obviously later on we're going to get to some OTA preview, is they implemented a new award that they're going to start handing out this coming season, and that is the Protector of the Year.
What a name.
I know. I like the name,
What a
actually.
name.
It's got a nice spin to
like it.
Yeah. So it is going to be, obviously, an award to the best offensive lineman in football, and it'll begin in 2025. Deion Dawkins of the Bills was a big proponent. And then they're going to have a committee, Matt. They're going to have a bunch of former offensive linemen, LaCharles Bentley, Jason Kelsey, our very own Sean O'Hara, Orlando Pace, Will Shields, and Andrew Whitworth. They're going to be on a committee/panel, and then it seems as if every quarter of the season they're going to update the candidates. And this is what they're going to utilize to determine the award: skills, metrics, impact, leadership, durability, and this is interesting, strength of the opponent, which to me is a very open-ended statement. Does that mean you're going to look at the caliber of the defensive linemen that they're going up against, the caliber of the overall defense that they're playing, if injuries take a toll on a defense that you go up against? I'd love to get a little bit more clarity, but listen, they give out an award for just about anything in this day and age. So I don't think anybody should make a big fuss out of this, but I think offensive linemen, we talk about it ad nauseum on this show. They play a vital role. Anybody that knows a thing or two about football will be the first to tell you it's nice that they get in some limelight. I think it's well-deserved.
I love this. I think it's about time that the big guys up front get some recognition, because the way it's always been, the only way an offensive lineman could get recognized is Pro Bowl and All-Pro, which obviously any offensive lineman would tell you those are great honors, and they would obviously love to achieve either of those, both. But basically every other position on the field, you at least have the opportunity to potentially take home some other award, whether it's Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, MVP. Offensive linemen are never in the conversations for those, despite the fact that there are some offensive linemen in the league, some tackles, that are in the discussion for being the best players in the NFL. It's just, it's not, a sexy position, so they don't really get the praise that, a flashy wide receiver or the star quarterback would get. But those flashy wide receivers and star quarterbacks, they're not having the success that they have without the help of their offensive linemen. That's why every single year you see the starting quarterbacks buy their entire offensive line some huge, expensive gift, because they know they can't accomplish anything without the guys up front. And we've seen it with the Giants the last 2 years. When Andrew Thomas, who's clearly the team's best offensive lineman, when he's gone down the last 2 years, the line and the offense as a whole kind of cratered. So it just goes to show how important the protection is up front. I am so on board with them finally getting an award, something to recognize the hard work, the leadership, both on and off the field. I am all for this. I think it's long overdue. Well, certain Lions offensive linemen have already thrown their name in the skill position award, right? Because of how they're utilized. But they're the outlier under those circumstances. The other thing, though, that it got me thinking about, Matt, is how this could impact perhaps the salary cap and offensive line contracts. And the reason why I throw that out, when an individual wins an award, an agent can utilize that, right, as a negotiating mechanism. And if individual offensive linemen now are going to win an award, especially if you're a guard, and keep in mind, the way I'm going to go off a little topic, somewhat related, the franchise tag groups offensive linemen all together. There's no designation. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It doesn't make sense. There's no center tag, guard tag, tackle tag. And I'm sure even front office executives would like the individualized delegation.
That goes for fifth-year options too, isn't it? Didn't the
I
Ravens
believe
just
so.
decline Tyler Linderbaum's fifth-year option despite him being an amazing center because it would have made him by far and away the highest-paid center in the league?
I think you're accurate with that. So that's more of a reason why it got me thinking, does this help the cause of offensive linemen from a negotiating standpoint? Does it make perhaps the league rethink about how the tags are delegated? Because of, once again, if guards can distinguish themselves, because once again, all offensive linemen are going to be up for this award. This is not, will a tackle most likely win it? Probably at the early stages. But look, there's a lot of guards on this panel. There's not just tackles. There's center. Sean O'Hara's a center. I'm sure those guys are going to be watching the interior offensive linemen closely and say, hey, you should consider this guy, not necessarily the ones that always play out on the edge.
If this award had existed for the last, let's just say, decade, you can't tell me that Quentin Nelson wouldn't have won it at least once.
Or Zach Martin.
Or Zach Martin, yeah. So 100%. Will it, I hope it leads to a conversation about, offensive linemen with the franchise tag and fifth-year option, because right now the way it's structured just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Every other position is differentiated between, you look at the defensive line, defensive tackle and defensive end. Those are two different designations in terms of the salary cap, in terms of franchise tag, fifth-year options. It doesn't really make sense why the offensive line wouldn't be exactly the same.
No, I'm in agreement with you. That's why I think that's an extra layer that's not being brought up enough about it. We just look at, it's another award, another trophy. You got to think about perhaps the financial ramifications that could come into the conversation. I will tell you this. Every agent that represents an offensive lineman is smiling ear to ear right now that there is just another item that they could put up there when they're negotiating for their respective clients. This is Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. It's presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. He's Matt Citak. I'm Lance Medow. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to open up the phone lines, and then Matt and I, second half of the show, will get into OTAs, which will start up on Tuesday next week. Some of the things that you should look for, given the fact that we know there's no contact, there's no padding, but there are a few players and at least situations that you should keep close tabs on as we look past Memorial Day weekend. All right, let's head to the phone lines. We got Eddie in Fort Lee. He gets us started. What's happening, Eddie? What do you got for us?
Good morning. Nice to talk to you guys. The second-time caller, and it's been a few years since I've called.
Thanks for calling again.
First, I have a question, and then I have a comment.
Sure.
Let me get off my chest. Which is worse, Atlanta blowing the Super Bowl a few years back, or the Knicks under 3 minutes last night?
I'm going to have to go with Atlanta just because it was the Super Bowl and not game one of a conference finals, but yeah, last night was pretty brutal. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I would agree with Matt.
I was trying to make a point more than get an answer, I guess.
Sure.
It was rough.
It was heartbreaking.
That was
can't
rough.
get over it.
Plus, it's also not
Hard
the
to
first
do.
time the Knicks have unraveled in the playoffs, too, against the Pacers.
Did you remember? Did you think of Reggie Miller during
Without a
the
doubt.
late in the
I
game?
remember that vividly.
You had to with Halliburton doing the celebration that Reggie did.
Sure.
It was hard not to think of it.
Absolutely. All right, you guys last week, and I know Paul was the proponent of it, but we talked about tanking, and I want to get a few things off my chest, whether it be the Colts game or any other game. We know it's never going to come from up top, and we know when our coach and general manager are on the hot seat, they're never going to say, lay down so we lose. But I want to talk about player X, and when you're a 3-win team, you have a lot of player X's who are fighting for their NFL lives, something they've done, they've wanted to do, and they've worked hard at since they were in grade school. And when you hear people talking about tanking, you're asking one of those guys who's trying to make a living, and you're asking him to lay down so you can have a better draft pick. How ridiculous that is.
Sure. Well, and that's why. I mean, listen, Eddie, I've brought this up on multiple shows. Players will never buy into that philosophy because A, they don't have guaranteed contracts, and B, they may not even be on the team the following year. So why would a player care about where a team drafts next season if they're not guaranteed to have a roster spot? The only item that you could bring up, which is somewhat backed by rational thought, is if a team decided to not put out their best players who are healthy, then you're going to obviously impact the ability to match up with an opposing team. But if you have all hands on deck, players are going to compete regardless of what's on the line. The only way you impact that is if you take your best talent off the field that is unrelated to injury. That's the only way you perhaps impact the outcome of a game.
I think that's what I was trying to say. I hope it came out that way.
Sure.
And thank you for agreeing.
Yeah, you got it, Eddie.
It just drove me crazy.
No, listen, I would echo your sentiments. Absolutely appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a ring.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, I mean, I think all of us that sit in these chairs on a daily basis working on the show would agree. Tanking is just not something that we will ever support. As Lance, as you just mentioned, as Eddie mentioned, the players on the team are fighting for their livelihoods each and every week. As we know, the average span of a NFL player's career is what, like 3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, not even for some.
Not even for a lot of guys. So they are never going to pass up an opportunity to put their best possible, performance on tape, whether it's to, stay with the team that they're currently on or as sort of like an interview for the next team that they're going to try to grab a spot on. So, I feel like we've spoken about this topic a lot, more so towards the end of this past regular season, but tanking is just not something that any of us are ever going to support in any sort of way. The only thing I will say is if you have a situation where you have you're one of your best players who has been fighting through some ailment for weeks, and you get to the last game of the season and the game means absolutely nothing, and you decide, you know what, he's fought through this enough, we're going to not risk him injuring it even further, suffering a serious injury, you want to sit him for that I can understand. But if players are healthy, there's no reason for them to not be on the field giving it their all, and every single player on this team would agree with that sentiment.
Well, and I'll even take it a step further. We were talking about, I guess, to use the term, some of those fringe players, right? Back into the roster who they're not guaranteed anything. But even if you look at it from the top heaviness of a roster, Matt, there are a lot of players, even if mathematically they don't have anything at stake late in the season, that have incentives in their contracts. And a lot of guys are going to say, I'm going to go out and play because if I get to 1,000 receiving yards or 1,000 rushing yards, all of a sudden I take home another $1 million. Yeah. And you're going to hear a lot of guys that are going to say, I'm going to go out and compete as a result of that. On top of that, I've heard from coaches, Todd Haley, who I did a lot of shows with, the longtime NFL offensive coordinator on SiriusXM. He told me once, last game of the season, they're playing, this was when he was with the Arizona Cardinals, Matt. They're playing, I believe it was Mike Holmgren and the Seahawks. Last game of the season, Todd tells Kurt Warner to run a play. It was, I don't know if you remember that year, and you can look this up, those of you listening and tuning in. The Arizona Cardinals had a chance to have 3 wide receivers get to 1,000 yards. I think Steve Breston was the third guy, in addition to Anquan Bolden and Larry Fitzgerald. So they knew they had to run a play. I think it was for Breston. So he tells in Kurt Warner's ear, throw this quick screen to Breston, and they're winning, they're up comfortably, and Kurt's like, why are we running that play? And he goes, because we need to get Steve the incentive to get to 1,000 yards. And they ran the play. So, you have scenarios like that. And then, he remembers walking to midfield and apologizing to Mike Holmgren that he ran a meaningless play, and he explained to him, and Mike had no issue with it. But that just gives you an example of those conversations are very much in the mix in giving top guys a reason to go out and compete.
Yeah, we've seen it even more recently. There was a situation, was it with Gronk, I think in his last season or one of his final seasons, where they were up big at the end of a game and everyone's like, why is Gronk still out there? Well, they threw him I think it was 2 straight passes just for him to reach an incentive and get however much money, added to his salary. And on top of that, taking the money aspect, incentive aspect out of it for a second, when you have a team, and especially a young team like the Giants, do you really want to sort of show your young players, we're not going to go out and try to win every single week? Just because the season's over, we're just going to give up the last couple of games of the season to help our draft pick for next year where half of you won't even be on the team. That's not something that you want to show and implement into your young guys at the beginning of their career. If you had tried the Giants coaching staff, I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume if they had tried to get Malik Neighbors to sit the last couple of games of the season as he was chasing the franchise reception record, the all-time rookie reception record, I don't think he would have been very happy about that. And it also would have been, again, installing not the greatest mindset into one of your best players as a rookie. So, yeah.
You don't want to develop bad habits is pretty much what you're laying out. Yeah. But guys will tell you they're there to put the uniform on and compete 24/7. So regardless of the record, anybody that argues that players just completely check out at the end of the season, I'm not saying that there are not exceptions, don't get me wrong, but the bulk, 99.8% of NFL players will tell you they've got to be all in because tomorrow's not guaranteed in this league, and that has certainly been well documented. Let's head back to the lines. Let's check it with Max in New Brunswick here on BBKL. What's happening, Max? What do you got for us?
Not much. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I just want to talk about my expectation for the season because I know we have a rough schedule, and this is kind of like you have certain fans calling in and they say unless we make the playoffs, you got to fire everybody. And I have a different perspective. There is a way for John Mara to feel better about the team this season, even if we don't make the playoffs or have a winning schedule. What does a team look like? We had 9 games of one score or less. I think we lost 8 of those. Do we have more games that get that close? Do our stats look better than they did last year? Does the offense look better? There's a lot of things that go into the final, more than just the final score and the final schedule. How do we get there? We have a tough schedule. We show out and we win against San Francisco, but we don't make the playoffs. That's still a positive in my opinion, even though the season itself may not turn out, with us going to playoffs or even have, a winning schedule. So that was just my opinion. I hear, especially 2 people in particular seem to always be Debbie Downers about the Giants, or if they don't make the playoffs, then you got to fire everybody, restart. I don't want another restart. I don't want to sit through a new coaching staff with potentially a better schedule and go through more of the same stuff. So that's just my opinion, and I'll take your comments off the air.
All right, Max. Appreciate the phone call. Thanks for giving us a
Max.
ring. Yeah, well, you don't want to go through a merry-go-round no matter what organization you are. I mean, you look around the league, teams that change coaches left and right and front office members usually find it very hard to build stability. I think that goes without saying. I think the last caller brought up some valid points with respect to, yes, wins and losses is clearly important because, Bill Parcells had the famous line, you are what your record is. But I think based on where the Giants were last season, you want to see from an optics standpoint, Matt, and I brought this up year after year, you've got to average over 20 points a game on offense. I mean, you can't hang around in the teens and expect to be competitive. So, that's one statistic that may not have anything to do with wins and losses, but you want to see, the offensive overall production leapfrog. That's an item that I'll throw out, and we've been talking about that many, many years in a row here. And that, once again, is not necessarily synonymous and tied into, because, you could get the offense up, but you could win, to the caller's point, a lot of close games. You're still showing improvement. It just may not be reflected in the standings, per se.
Yeah, and I appreciate the sentiment from the last caller because I feel like a lot of our fans do agree with that sentiment. There are some that are saying, we need to make the playoffs this year, otherwise everyone should be gone. And I've said this on the show. I think I said it even this week. You got to have realistic expectations considering how last season went. I understand this is now year 4 of the current regime. And, in year 4, you obviously, in general, year 4, you would like to see the team be a playoff contender on a consistent basis. But as we've talked about on the show previously, over the last couple of off seasons, there were obviously some big decisions that were made, especially at the quarterback position, that I think everyone would admit kind of set the timeline back a little bit. The contract that was given to Daniel Jones obviously did not play out how anyone would have wanted after that great playoff run in 2022, and that set the Giants back the last 2 years. Going into this year now, obviously, the quarterback room is completely revamped. And as I have said before, there are metrics that you can take from this upcoming season that are not just wins and losses that will make you feel so much better about the direction of this team come, January 10th, 2026. One of them, as you mentioned, the offense scoring more points. That has been such a big issue, the biggest issue, I would say, for this team for, go back however many years you want. That has been the biggest issue. Now, there are many things that have led to that. It's not just one person's fault, not one player. It's a group effort. But the Giants offense now has pieces at just about every position. There's, no more excuses. That unit needs to take a step this year. Likewise for the defense. The defense, this is probably the most talented defensive roster on paper that the Giants have had in at least a decade, in my opinion. Was it 2016 season, obviously, when they made the playoffs? They had a great defense that year, too.
Well, and that was the year Snacks you're talking about, when
they
also made some big splash at Janoris Jenkins.
Yeah, a lot of those big
Olivier Vernon. Those three guys
veteran
came in.
signings, which is somewhat how the Giants' current defense is built, but not all fully, because there are a lot of young players on rookie contracts that are going to play very big parts of this to the defense's success this year. So, as I've said, you can win 6 or 7 games this year. And I know some people may not like this, but you can win 6 or 7 games this year. And I hate putting a number on it, but just to give an example, which is double the amount of wins you had last year. And in those games that you lose, if you are competitive in almost all of them, you're not getting blown out on a weekly basis, you're going to end the season feeling a whole lot better about the direction of this team without making the playoffs. Obviously, we would all love a playoff run, a deep playoff run. We'd love that every single year. But you do have to kind of keep things in perspective and keep expectations somewhat in check, just given how the last 2 seasons have gone. It's not often that a team goes from 3-14 to, 12-5 in one season. Has it happened? For sure. Is it possible? Yeah. But I just don't want all the fans out there to have those expectations where they need to, win double-digit games because, again, just keeping realistic expectations in check, that may not happen this year. That doesn't mean to say that, 2 years from now that could not happen, because it fully could. If the Giants take a step this year, double their win counter, hit 7 or 8 wins this upcoming season, then guess what? That following year, then I can say you can put some expectations up for, that higher win total and really be in that serious playoff contention, in that playoff hunt.
The only thing that I'll add to that, though, that could make things interesting is, hypothetically speaking, if they make a transition to Jackson Dart, then, you got to account for Matt. Now, all of a sudden, you got the learning curve with a younger quarterback. That's why, and I'm not saying that you were insinuating this, but this idea that, everything just follows upward movement and we just ignore the changes. There are changes, you pointed out. The quarterback changed over the course of this regime. The other thing is, Wink Martindale was the defensive coordinator, and then you moved to Shane Bowen. And a new defensive coordinator comes in, all of a sudden doesn't just walk in, put his legs up, and say, all right, guys, let's just roll out the defense you played last season. No, he's going to put in a new scheme. And now Bowen's got new personnel this season. So, there are things that don't stay in the same areas and as is, even if the head coach and the general manager and a number of key weapons provide stability. Because the NFL, this is why I say I don't believe in the whole rebuilding term, not to get off topic, is because NFL rosters turn over more so, Matt, than any other professional sport.
Yep.
You get about 20 new guys on the roster every single year. So you're retooling, you're rebuilding, however you want to word it, on an annual basis, regardless of what your record is, because you never bring back everybody as is, or a coach changes or whatever may happen. And the Giants are not immune to these things. The other thing that statistically I've pointed out more often than not, we're emphasizing the offense, but keep in mind, Matt, it is very difficult, if you look historically in the NFL, for a team to improve by a touchdown from one year to the other. Now, think about this. Now, I know they had a merry-go-round to quarterbacks. The Giants were at 16 points per game. So to expect that, they're a lock to get 23 points per game this coming season without any hesitation, yes, you would say with the upgraded quarterback, with the upgrade at some other positions, they're in a good spot to do that, but that's no gimme to go a touchdown up. It's very difficult. I mean, you do the basic math. You know what it takes to go from 16 to 23 points a game in the span of one season? That is a lot of formulas that have to be intertwined.
Not
as
only
a result.
that, but Paul and I were discussing this the other day because a caller called in and said, I want the I think he said that the Giants' offense to average, I think it was 4 points more per game. And we looked at it. If the Giants were to score 4 points more per game from where they were last year, they go from one of the worst offenses to the top half of the league in offense, which all of us would take, going from one last year to this year. I think everyone would be happy with that. The other thing, which I should have mentioned when I was speaking just earlier, is that part of that thing that if the Giants, let's just, again, hypothetically were to win 6 or 7 games, that could make you feel good, and you touched on this. If the Giants are in that win total, that range, chances are Jackson Dart is going to see the field at some point. I don't know if, I'm not going to put any sort of number on what week that might be, but if that's where the Giants are and the playoffs are out of reach, chances are he will see some action if the coaching staff thinks he's ready. And if he does get on the field for however long it is, and he looks good, he looks like, okay, he's granted small sample size, but he looks like he's got it. That's going to make you feel so good going into next year. And that is going to make people more, I guess, a little bit more okay with another, maybe 6 or 7 win season, because it's going to, again, have you going into 2026 feeling incredibly good about the direction of this franchise. So that is a very, very big part. I should have mentioned that earlier. Obviously, in general, 6 games is not going to get anyone excited, but there are aspects of a 6 or 7 win season that could still make you feel positive going into the following year.
So it buys more patience, is what you're saying.
It should.
Gets on the field.
I understand
plays well.
Patience is running a little low with fans, and I totally get it, given how the last, want to call it decade plus has gone. I totally get it. But building a consistent playoff contender is a process. It takes time. And I know we all would have hoped that we would be there by now. But if it takes another year or 2 to get to that point, but then we have that perennial playoff contender, I think we'll all, be okay with having a little more suffering to get to that level.
That's why I always like to evaluate teams as individuals and rookie classes and how that progresses, because you want to look for the stabilizing forces, meaning the groups that in all likelihood will stay together regardless of the changes around them. That's why here's another rookie class they're adding into the mix. They need to come in and make a significant impact. The ones that, of course, are going to play in conjunction with the previous 2 years. And now you start putting those groups together and you have a core that you feel good that at least can provide a strong nucleus. At that point, last season or even now, it's still a little bit of the unknown because of guys that have been in and out of the lineup and so forth. Let's head back to the phone lines. We've got Big Ed in Maryland with us here. What's happening, Big Ed?
Hey, Lance, is that you, man?
It is indeed.
What's up, Lance? Oh, my gosh. I ain't talked to you in so long. I've been wondering what's been going on with you. What you been doing?
I've been busy as usual doing my thing. So what's happening with you? What's on your mind?
I just got Solomon a Giants T-shirt with Odell Beckham's number on the back. He's going to be practicing with it, getting him ready for this upcoming season. And we'll be at the first game. Jerseys on and everything.
Very nice.
It's going to be a big blue affair, big time. I was hoping you guys would be down there to be live with this broadcast for the first game. Would you?
What, for Big Blue Kickoff Live? Well, I mean, that's never happened, so that would be a first, Big Ed. You'd be calling for things.
Yeah. There it goes. It happened. Push it in, Lance. Tell Paul.
All right, well, I'll put it on my itemized list behind 75 other things. Yes.
John, look, please tell John. John, Big Ed is with you, bro. The Knicks are going to get through this. They fell asleep in the last 2 minutes, thought they had the game won, which they practically did, but they didn't finish it. So the game 2, they shall finish it, and it will be fine going into Indiana.
All right, Big Ed.
Right?
Yep. Appreciate the phone call.
As far as the season goes, as far as we go with the Big Blue, I've sitting here I've given it the positive thought, not the negative thought. And just for everybody's understanding, let's understand this. The offense averages 20 to 25 points a game. as long as the defense been doing what it's been doing for the last umpteen years, we put ourselves in a very good position to do something decent, more than them 5 or 6 wins. Personally, now this is a personal Big Ed dream. You guys will love this. We'll go 9-0 the first 9 games. I don't give a doggone who's on the schedule as long as we got a absolute dart at quarterback, throwing darts.
Well, the puns are just free-falling today.
Well, if the Giants are starting 9 and
really looking hot.
Big Ed, if the Giants are starting 9-0,
because we got a better defense, even better with those vets that's needed in there. Now that offense is still that same seasoning. It's still the line, still the quarterback. The wide receivers and the running backs are still fairly decent, enough to make moves, enough to do something. But we got to have proper game planning for each game. As long as Dart shows better than the others, he is capable of doing it, then he should be starting week 1.
I don't think that's going to happen, Ed. I think you got to be realistic. I think they brought in Russell Wilson. Well, I mean, listen, you're Mr. Optimistic, so I mean, it's nothing new from that standpoint. We'll let you go on that note. Appreciate the phone call. I think you were going to jump in, Matt, right, and say if they're 9-0, Dart's not seeing the field.
Yeah, I mean, look, Coach Dable, the last time he spoke to the media, said Russell Wilson is a starting quarterback. Obviously, he didn't say for the entire season from now until the end of the 2025 season. But right now, Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback. And they clearly brought in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston with the intention of letting those guys lead the room before ever considering putting whatever rookie they ended up adding in the draft in at the quarterback position. So if the Giants start 9-0, Jackson Dart is not sniffing the field. And I've said this so many times on the show with Paul where I hope Jackson Dart doesn't see the field at all this year, because if he doesn't see the field at all, that means the Giants are having an incredible season. They're in the playoff hunt, winning games. The offense is gelling. All things that we would love to see. If Jackson Dart doesn't take a meaningful snap until the 2026 season, barring injuries, of course, that can only mean good things for this Giants team. And I would totally be on board with that. As excited as I am to eventually see Jackson Dart lead this offense, you don't want to rush him in before he's ready. You want to give him time to develop, grow, get accustomed to the speed and all of the complexities of playing in the NFL, because playing the quarterback position in the NFL is probably the hardest position to play in all of sports. That's why it's the most important position in all of sports. You don't want to rush a rookie quarterback out there before he's fully ready. Now, he could look great in training camp. It's fully possible. Within the realm of possibilities. But even if he does, I don't want to put him out there week 1. Again, there's a reason why Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston were brought in. Now, if he does look great all summer throughout training camp in the preseason, maybe he ends up going into a game earlier than we originally would have expected. But it'd shock me if that would come all the way in week 1.
Yeah, I mean, there's no need to put him on the field. I mean, that's the best way that I would describe it. You have Russell Wilson, a seasoned veteran, atop the depth chart. So, barring an injury, there once again is no reason for him to play right out of the gates. Now, depending on how the season plays out, to your point, late in a game that's lopsided, you want to throw him out there just to gain some experience, that's fine. But meaningful starting opportunities, there's no need for that to happen with Russell Wilson on the roster, because they have somebody that's capable of orchestrating the offense. Now, the other thing that I wanted to respond to is Big Ed threw out 25 points per game averaging on offense, if I heard that correctly, Matt. So, and I think you were talking about this earlier with you and Paul having a previous conversation. So if you go to 25 points a game, last season, the Minnesota Vikings averaged 25.4. Minnesota was 9th in the NFL in scoring offense. I mean, just to once again be realistic and put things in perspective, you would be talking about having the 9th best offense in the NFL a year removed from being 31st in that department. Could you make a jump like that? I'm not going to say it's impossible. Is it likely, Matt, though? I would say probably not. And then Denver was 25 on the nose, right behind Minnesota. So they rounded out the top 10 scoring offenses in the National Football League. Now, I'd be curious. I'm just going to do an exercise here. So Minnesota and Denver, let's see what they were in 2023. just to get an idea of where they jump.
Denver probably did make a big jump
because of the rookie quarterback and the change and Russell Wilson having a rough year the previous year. So I'm just going to look just out of curiosity. All right, we'll start with Minnesota first. The Vikings in 2023, they were at 20.2. Okay, so that's noticeable. About 5, they jumped, but 5's different than 7. That's still 2 more points we're talking about. Denver was at 21 the previous season, so they went up 4. So, that just goes to show you, even when you think about, a quarterback changed or a new coach came in, 4 points, pretty damn good. But now you're talking about 7? And, by the way, for them to get to 25, that would take more than 7 points, okay? Yeah. We're doing, I know, hard math here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Go from 16 to 25. That's a 9-point improvement, Matt. I'm telling you right now, I would be blown away if that happens.
Yeah, that would certainly be one of the more surprising things that could happen this season. I think we all can agree that we do expect the offense to obviously improve. Obviously, the quarterback position is incredibly more stable now between Russell Wilson, again, Jameis Winston as the backup, Jackson Dart, and even right now, Tommy DeVito. All 4 quarterbacks. Jackson Dart's obviously the rookie, but all the other 3 quarterbacks have won games in the NFL, have shown that they belong on an NFL roster and can lead a team if thrust into action. The offensive line, at least right now, or going into training camp, should be healthy. And obviously, as we saw last year, when the offensive line was healthy, the offense did not look nearly as, poor as it did once Andrew Thomas got hurt. When he got hurt in I think it was the Week 6 game and then missed the rest of the season, it was noticeable. Other than that Colts game, it was noticeable that Andrew Thomas was not there. The whole line took a huge step back. Other guys got injured as well. But with stability at the quarterback position, a healthy offensive line, you have Malik Neighbors now going into his 2nd season, coming off his record-setting rookie year. You have an improved running back room with, again, Tyrone Tracy going into year 2 and only year 3 playing the running back position. I think that is something that is overlooked with Tracy's development, along with Cam Scatterbo, Theo Johnson going into year 2. This offense should take a step. And obviously the quarterback position is the most important key to that. But to expect them to go from, 16 last year to 25, I can't remember the last time a team made that big of a jump.
That'd be historical.
Well, I'm curious, what was Washington's jump?
I just looked it up. There was 18 point something up to 29 point something.
Okay, so that was one example then. But of
Washington
course,
made that jump, you said, Pearson?
Last year.
But they obviously were lucky to draft Jaden Daniels, who looks like he could be a franchise-altering quarterback. And while, obviously Russell Wilson is going to be definitely a step up to the quarterback play the Giants have had the last couple of years, Jaden Daniels is 22 years old, and already one of the best players in the NFL. Obviously, not even into his prime years yet. Russell Wilson is in the latter stage of his career, and no one's going to argue that. So to expect that big of a jump from the Giants this year, again, just trying to keep expectations somewhat in check.
Well, and also keep in mind that Washington completely changed its coaching staff and schemes, too.
That's true.
The Giants are not in that boat. Not to say that you can't improve, but there are slight differences. When a new coaching staff and a new scheme comes in, you're ripping everything to shreds. You're starting fresh. So it's possible, okay, that could yield something. There is still cohesion on the offensive side of things in terms of play calling. So, that can't be overlooked in terms of the ins and outs when it comes to what happens on offense. All right, before we wrap up shop here, let's look ahead to OTAs that'll start on Tuesday. And this relates to what you were talking about, the development of the rookie class. Those are things that I look at in OTAs because, see, to me, OTAs is about certain individuals. It's not so much about what the team's doing. The pads are not on. There's no contact. To evaluate guys in the trenches, to me, is getting way ahead of things. Yeah, How much are you truly going to tell?
You can't. The guys in the trenches, OTAs, there's nothing you can really
gain
from them.
So
to be honest.
I look for, Matt, specifically players that are getting into year 2, maybe year 3. For example, if you were to ask me one player that you're anxious to see, my answer would be Jalen Hyatt.
It's funny you say that because in this week's Fact or Fiction, which is coming out tomorrow, one of the prompts was what player has the most to gain this spring, and that is exactly who
and I didn't look
chose.
at it. I'm telling you right now,
I did not look at it.
It's not up yet. Okay,
so
that's more of a reason why I couldn't have looked at it.
I could not agree with you more. I think these next couple of weeks of spring practices will be so huge for guys like Jalen Hyatt, but especially Jalen Hyatt, because obviously last year didn't go how he or anyone would have hoped. He only had 8 receptions, didn't see the field that much. Blame it on whatever you want. It doesn't really matter at this point. But now he's entering year 3. And this is going to be a very obviously big offseason leading into training camp, and then training camp and season for him to show that, hey, I'm an NFL receiver. I belong here. Because the guy won the Biletnikoff Award a couple years ago as the nation's best wide receiver. You don't just, forget how to play the position.
There's talent.
Or go from being the best player at your position in the entire country to barely being able to, stay in the NFL. Like that typically does not happen too often. So I cannot wait to see Jalen Hyatt out there. I think the addition of Russell Wilson is especially big for him because one of Hyatt's best abilities is his ability to stretch the field. And as we know, Russell Wilson has made a career out of those moon balls.
Yep.
Jalen Hyatt could be the biggest beneficiary of Russell Wilson being the quarterback now with those deep balls. Him and Darius Slayton, I should say, because they both do a good job of taking the tops off the defense. But yeah, starting next week, Jalen Hyatt will certainly be one of the guys I've got my eye on the closest.
Yeah, he's atop the list. And then I would say really the rest of the wide receiver position, because I think there's opportunity outside of the top 3. Neighbor, Slayton, and Robinson. Who is the 4th wide receiver? Is it Jalen Hyatt? Bryce Ford-Whedon? Is he going to maybe move up the ladder? They brought in Jackson Dart's college teammate, Antoine Wells, as one of the undrafted guys. So Zach Pascal, who was brought in.
Little Jordan Humphrey.
Well, I thought he was let go.
He was brought back.
He was brought back. Okay,
yeah.
Just wanted to get clarification on that. But we also don't know, is he going to get to a tight end spot? He's sort of in that middle ground with respect to that. But certainly I would throw him in. I would say anyone ranked 4 through whatever number they go up to, that's the position group. Those are the individuals I'm watching because it's where there's opportunity for growth and development, and I think you really want to see what they could bring to the table, and you could tell a little bit about that. They don't need to put the pads on. I think the more activity that they get out on the field during OTAs and you see them line up against corners and you see how they run and whether or not they can get open, whether the pads are on or not, you can get a sense of what the guy brings to the table. So my focus is really solely on that part of the field as opposed to anything else going on, which I think is going to be limited in terms of your takeaways.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that part of the field because I think just as important as how the wide receivers look the next couple of weeks, the same goes for the defensive backfield, the secondary, because, the team drills are, I believe, I don't know if this for sure, I believe it probably will be 7-on-7 drills. Last year, I don't think they ran 11-on-11s during OTAs. If it's the same this year, even if it's not, as we said, there's no contact allowed. So the trenches there's not much you can gain. It's really those wide receiver and tight end matchups against the corners and safeties that are the big things to watch. And obviously, Giants put some major asset allocation towards the secondary this offseason between Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland. You have Tyler Nubin going into year 2.
Yep.
Coming off a season-ending foot injury that made him miss the last month of the season. You have Drew Phillips going into year 2, coming off a very promising rookie season. And you have Deonte Banks, who, because of these other additions, seems to be sort of the forgotten man in the secondary. But obviously last year did not go quite as, Deonte probably would have hoped. But the guy was still a first-round pick 2 years ago. The talent is there. He's got the size. I think this is a big couple of week stretch for all of those guys, but almost as much as Jalen Hyatt I'll be looking at, Deonte Banks I will be keeping a close eye on as well because I think he has the opportunity starting next week to show people, hey, don't forget, I was a first-round pick not too long ago. Don't sleep on me. Just because we brought these other guys in doesn't mean I just forget about me completely. So I'm excited to see what Deonte Banks can do next week as well.
Well, especially with a veteran like Paulson Adebo coming in, that sometimes sends a message to a young guy that, hey, everybody is replaceable regardless of where you were selected. I think just in addition to what you were saying, when guys are coming off injuries like Nubin and Adebo, you also want to see how much activity they're involved in out of the gates. We don't know.
We don't know, but so those two, I mean, Theo Johnson had the season-ending. We have no idea how much. Obviously, we hope these guys are on the field doing all these drills, but we don't really know for sure.
Well, they may just be conservative and take it easy on them. It may not be a sign that they have a setback. It's just they don't want to overdo it.
Yeah, even some of those guys, in the photo galleries that have been posted on the website from phase 2 of the offseason, like some of those guys have been out there. Just because they're not out here potentially next week, again, does not mean that there was some sort of setback. I mean, last year we saw the Giants play conservatively with a couple of guys that were coming off injuries. There's just, if a guy is even the slightest bit maybe not 100%, there's no need to rush him back now when training camp is 2 months away. You'd rather obviously come into training camp with everyone being 100% healthy. So yeah, we've been talking about some of these guys that are coming off the serious injuries. We don't know for sure if they will be out there for team drills. Obviously, would love to see it because I just want to see best on best starting next week, but just wanted to, put that out there. Just because a guy may not be out there next week doesn't mean that there is some major cause for concern about his injury status.
Because they have plans for each player and depends on the medical team and so forth. So I wouldn't read too much into that. All right, that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants, as we are in the Giants podcast studio presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. A reminder, with another impactful drafted free agency class in the books, that means it's full steam ahead to the 2025 season. You can take your fandom to the next level with a Giants season ticket membership. Catch all the action at MetLife Stadium with an exciting home schedule on the horizon. With a membership, you'll also stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days, with exclusive member access and benefits. To learn more about a New York Giants season ticket membership, visit Giants.com/tickets. Today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. From Matt Citak, I'm Lance Medow. Enjoy Memorial Day weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday right here on BBKL. Have a good one.